Old Testament reading is Genesis chapter 29, beginning with the 15th verse. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful and lovely. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go in to her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah, and Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to wife. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. On this very space, I presided over a wedding yesterday, Saturday, and I can guarantee you that that wedding went way better than Jacob's wedding that you just heard about from Genesis 29. So here's a quick confession. I get annoyed very easily and often, and I hope that some of you can relate. Early on in our marriage, my wife used to say, "Uiyeon, if you continue to boycott everything, there won't be any places left to go and people to see." She gets annoyed by my annoyance. I'm not proud of it. I don't like it. It's something that I've been working on. It's something that I've gotten better at, but it's something that I still wrestle with to this day. Here it gets when it gets a little bit more trickier. It's somewhat problematic, perhaps really problematic, when I find that I'm annoyed by someone or something and nobody else is annoyed by that person. Then I start asking myself, is there something wrong with me? Is it me? Why is nobody else bothered by this said person or thing, and I'm the only that seemingly is so disturbed by what's going on here? Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, a founder of analytical psychology, he suggests that the reason why some people irritate us so much is because they embody something of ours called the shadow side. Shadow side is a part of ourselves we don't like, aspect of our being that we've hidden away, tucked away in secret so as not for us to address them. So to put it simply, those that we find to be so bothersome and annoying, Jung would say that they're just reflections of our own shortcomings, the things that we've hidden away, and therefore we wish not to be around them, for they remind us of the aspects of our lives we'd rather avoid. So, if Jung is right, according to him, someone like me has a lot of shadows because I am often annoyed. I'm going to take some of your nods and your laughters as saying, we're in the same boat, yeah? That I'm not the only one to have experienced this. He writes, "The shadow personifies everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself and represents a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well." Shadow side not only perhaps speaks certain truth to me and for some of us, but I think it speaks well to what's going on within the dynamic of relationship between Jacob and Laban. So here's a quick recap about Jacob. He has a twin brother, Esau, who is older. They're the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac is getting on in his years, nearing the end of his journey. So it comes time for him to anoint blessings, specifically blessings reserved for the oldest son. Jacob does not like this one bit. I imagine perhaps as a younger son, just by a few minutes, mind you, that he has felt a certain kind of way most of his life, that he seemed that he was the less visible one in the eyes of his father compared to his older brother Esau. So he decides to deceive his father and cheat his brother by pretending to be Esau, and he receives the blessings specifically designated for the oldest son. And then, upon deceiving his father and cheating his brother, he runs away from his home in fear of the vengeance of his older brother Esau. He eventually ends up with Rebekah's brother Laban, his uncle. I've often said that Jacob's one of my favorite characters. I find him to be so relatable precisely because he is so flawed. Not only because of what he does to his father and his brother and his family, but upon fleeing, he doesn't seem to show a lot of remorse for the wounds and the hurts that he's caused. He just leaves. He's the type of person, perhaps in seasons past, I might have looked at such a person to say, there's no change in him. He's a lost cause. No need to invest anything worthy of me onto that person. And then you have Laban, Rebekah's brother, Isaac's uncle. It turns out that Laban, much like Jacob, is a deceiver and a cheater. Their initial encounter goes well enough. There is a welcome and embrace. But soon enough and surely, Laban sees in Jacob someone who is not only a hard worker, but someone who is fruitful, who is anointed, and who is blessed by God. And Laban attempts at every twist and turn to exploit Jacob's fruitfulness. When he finds out that Jacob has fallen in love with his younger daughter, Rachel, he hatches a plan. They come to an agreement. Work 7 years, and my younger daughter, Rachel, will be your wife. Now we read in chapter 29 that the 7 years, that's a long time. But he worked 7 years, but it seemed merely like days because of his love for Rachel. And it's like, oh, how sweet. The wedding night comes. Laban sends his daughter to Jacob's tent, but it wasn't Rachel. It was the older daughter, Leah, with what we read as having weak eyes. Not exactly sure what that means. The very next morning, Jacob wakes up next to not Rachel, but Leah. What have you done, Laban? Why have you done this to me? Quick pause here. This is another day for another sermon, how Jacob could mistake an entire person for another. Here's another pause. And this is another sermon for another day as well. Please note, and I can't go into this, but please note that Leah is betrayed by her father Laban and her husband Jacob. She is discarded by the two people who should have loved her the most. And it is precisely because of this later on, as you should read on in Genesis, that God is merciful unto Leah, for God has seen her tears, seen her journey, seen that she's been abandoned by the people who should have taken care of her. So as it is in chapter 29, Laban does to Jacob, cheating him, deceiving him, what Jacob does to his father and his brother. And it doesn't end there, by the way. It happens over and over again. Laban continues to do this over and over again. But as we know, God often works with those who are least expected, the deceivers and the doubters. Despite Jacob's follies and Laban's dishonorable intentions, God works through Jacob to realize the covenantal promises made first to Abraham and Sarah. So, Jacob, despite all that Laban puts him through, becomes extraordinarily fruitful, successful, so much so that he harbors the anger and jealousy and envy and hatred of Laban and his sons. So he has to flee unexpectedly in the middle of the night with his wives, with his children, with his property, away from Laban and his threats. So where does he go? He goes back home. He goes back to his brother Esau. When we read on, particularly in chapter 32 and 33, we will witness to a remarkable shift in the character of Jacob. Something happened throughout his journey. Something happened between his leaving home and his returning home. He knows what may await him. He has no idea how Esau would respond if his vengeance has toned down. He prays on his journey back home. He prays to God, saying, I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray thee. And you know how the story goes. Jacob sends his servants, his gifts, presents, vastness of his wealth before him as a peace offering to Esau. And the time comes when he finally greets his brother, older brother that he has cheated, the brother that he has conned face to face. He's afraid. To his surprise, Esau is gracious. He welcomes him home. He says, Jacob, I don't need these presents from you. I'm just glad that you are back. To which, this is what Jacob tells his brother Esau. No, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. With such favor have you received me. Accept, I pray you, my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. What a remarkable turnaround. Did you catch what happened here? There is an incredible transformation in Jacob. This is the very one who lied to his dad and cheated his older brother precisely because he saw himself as the one without. And now, as he returns home, he tells his older brother Esau, take all. He offers graciously and generously, confessing, the Lord has dealt graciously with me, and I have enough. Take all. I like to think that in this remarkable transformation and turnabout in Jacob's life, that Laban had a part in this turnaround. That in Laban, Jacob got out-Jacobed. In Laban, Jacob saw someone who was even more conniving, deceiving, despicable, someone who's even more annoying than himself. And instead of falling into despair, anger, and hatred, perhaps Jacob took another route. Perhaps Jacob saw his shadow side in his honest form and offered it to God to say, God, cleanse me of my sins. I offer my shadow to you in certain hope that your grace is greater than my shadows. And experienced the fullness of God's grace in his life and transformed his life around to a different path. On a side note, I think it would be good for you and for me and all others Should we find certain folks, certain situations so unbearable and annoying, instead of discarding those people, perhaps we can pay attention to them. I'm not saying we need to be best friends with them, but simply to say perhaps there is a lesson here to be learned, truth to be confronted, shadows to be redeemed, and offer those things before God, trusting that God's grace is bigger than our shadows. And on a more lighter note, should you find me annoying in any way, just remember that it speaks more about you than it does about me. Let me end our time with a reflection by Dr. Howe last week. He reminded me, for those of us who follow him on social media, in conjunction with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who's no longer with us, but they reflected upon Jacob, asking the question, why Jacob? Why Jacob? Not righteous like Noah. Jacob hadn't responded to God's call like Abraham, and no sense of justice burned in him like Moses. So why Jacob? Jacob's heritage for us is this: though we may fall, we fall into the arms of God. Though others may lose faith in us, and though we may even lose faith in ourselves, God never loses faith in us. And though we may feel utterly alone, we are not. God is there beside us. Thanks be to God. Amen.